Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Bridget O'Grady, the Policy and Legislative Affairs Manager here at ASDRA, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion on the EMAC, Emergency Management Assistance Compact process, and what that process means for state drinking water programs. We have an excellent group of presenters today: Jack Jowett, the EMAC advisor for the National Emergency Management Association; Carol Hinton, the director of the University of Florida TRIO Center; and Jeff Fensel from EPA's Water Security Division, who will both set the stage for today's discussion and then put together some EMAC tips for state drinking water programs. On the logistics side, please type your questions in the pop-up panel on your screen, and we're going to hold all questions until after all presentations. And as always, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the ASDRA website within the next few days. So with that, let's begin. Jeff?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Bridget and ASWA, for inviting us to speak today. As Bridget mentioned, my name is Jeff Fensel, and I work for EPA's Water Security Division out of our headquarters in Washington, D.C. And what we'd like to do for today's webinar is to discuss interstate mutual aid and assistance for the water sector, specifically the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or EMAC, which is the primary instrument for sharing resources across state lines during governor-declared emergencies. So, just to go through the agenda for today. First, I will discuss why interstate mutual aid and assistance is important for the water sector. And then second, Jack Jowett, an EMAC advisor for NEMA, will provide an overview of EMAC, essentially what it is and how it works. This will be followed by a case study about the water sector experience with EMAC during Hurricane Irma in Florida. And the case study will be presented by Carol Hinton of the University of Florida Training, Research, and Education for Environmental Occupation Center, or TRIO Center, who is also a partner of the Florida WARN, or the Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network, which, as you all may know, is an intrastate mutual aid and assistance network of utilities helping utilities. To date, there are 49 states and the National Capital Region that have active WARNs. And then finally, we will have a discussion on how you all can support the EMAC process. And this will leave us with plenty of time to answer any questions you may have following the presentation. Okay, what I would like to do now is discuss the overall importance of interstate mutual aid and assistance and why it is necessary and important for the water sector. Well, from what we have seen from recent events, drinking water and wastewater utilities have been impacted by several hurricanes and large storm events over the past few years. As you may recall, most recently, Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria that occurred in August and September of 2017. And with these large-scale events, intrastate mutual aid and assistance, or sharing of available resources within the state, may not work as designed when a large percentage of utilities in that state are threatened or impacted, as you'll see from Carol's presentation. So when may interstate mutual aid and assistance be needed for the water sector? Well, basically, when resource needs exceed intrastate mutual aid and assistance capabilities. And looking at the figure on the bottom of the slide on your screen, moving from left to right, when a water emergency occurs, it prompts the utility to assess the impact and determine if they have the resources on hand to address it. If they don't have the resources on hand, they may look for intrastate mutual aid and assistance, starting out with local agreements with neighboring utilities, then expanding to WARN member utilities as appropriate, and then statewide agreements if the incident escalates to that level. So if the incident is severe enough and the state's governor declares an emergency or a disaster, and that's a key part of EMAC, when the governor declares an emergency or disaster, you could then activate the congressionally ratified EMAC agreement, which allows states to send personnel, equipment, and commodities to other states to help with disaster relief. And Jack Jowett, again from NEMA, will provide an overview of EMAC shortly. So while WARNs are initially focused on the intrastate networks, interstate mutual aid and assistance agreements such as EMAC may be needed to share resources across state lines. So why else is interstate mutual aid and assistance particularly important for the water sector? Well, a need for interstate mutual aid assistance was recognized after Hurricane Sandy, in particular from the American Water Works Association after action report for Hurricane Sandy, which basically said that greater connectivity is necessary with partners in local and state emergency operations centers and emergency management agencies to make the linkage for water sector requests that may exceed interstate capabilities, thus requiring the need for interstate mutual aid assistance, such as the use of EMAC. And then another need was recognized after a 2011 Southeast Warren Interstate Mutual Aid and Assistance tabletop exercise, where they found that additional education about EMAC is needed for the water sector, and also EMAC personnel educated more about water sector interstate mutual aid and assistance needs. And in the next slide, I will talk about what EPA, or specifically the Water Security Division, has done to assist with educating the water sector on interstate mutual aid and assistance. And then finally, the proximity of systems across state lines may be closer than neighboring utilities within their own state. And then also large systems that are affected may not be able to access enough resources from the rest of the utilities within the state to meet their needs. So that is why interstate mutual aid and assistance is important for the water sector. So what has EPA done to educate and assist the water sector on this topic? Well, to date, we have conducted 4 workshops in EPA's regions 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10. And some of you on the call today may have attended one of these workshops. The overall goal of the workshops was to develop actionable items to help improve interstate mutual aid and assistance among utilities and also among the warns. And this included first exchanging ideas about how to better work together on water sector emergency management issues. At the end of these workshops, what we held were breakout sessions, state-by-state breakout sessions. So for instance, if we had a workshop in EPA Region 1, then the 6 states in New England would break out by their own state, where you'd have the warrants, other utilities, primacy agencies, state emergency management agencies, really exchange ideas how to better work together. And then second, we'll learn important details about how water utilities can better utilize EMAC. And as you'll hear shortly, Jack Jowett from NEMA was an integral part of these workshops as well, coming as a representative from NEMA who administers EMAC to further discuss the process of EMAC. And then finally, to work to develop plans to make the process more efficient and effective in the future. And I really think one of the best benefits of these workshops was making those connections, specifically the EMAC reps, representatives from the state emergency management agencies. Now, just a note too, we are also planning to conduct another workshop in Region 7 this year. So this will include the states of Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa. So if you are within the primacy agencies in those states, expect to see an email from me probably within the next month or so, inviting you to the workshop with details on location, date, time, all that information. And that's all I have for you at the time being. And with that, what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Jack Jowett, again from NEMA, to further discuss EMAC, what it is, and how it works. Take it away, Jack.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'd also like to thank everyone for having this webinar, presenting it, and allowing us to be a part of it. We are always trying to get the word out about EMAC. If we're all prepared and working together, it's going to make recovery from events much easier and faster. So what I've got here today is an overview, high level. I'm going to go through it not quickly, but briskly. So if you have questions, please have them ready at the end. So what is EMAC? EMAC is the governor's interstate mutual aid system, governor to governor, state to state. It stands alone. It's another tool in your toolbox, so to speak. When you need assistance, you can get another state that can provide that to you through this system. In order for states to be able to share resources across state borders, it had to become federal law. So the public law is here, 104-321, that was passed in 1996, so 22 years ago. It also had to be legislated in each state. So each member state, which includes all 50 states, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the District of Columbia, and Guam, have all passed legislation in their state to become a member. The law assigns responsibility for EMAC to the State Emergency Management Director. The Emergency Management Director, if you are interested to read the law, has responsibilities to prepare, to warn neighboring states, and just to be ready if a request comes out, if it's possible to provide assistance, to be prepared to do that. It was originally intended to be state to state, and in the early days, assistance that was provided was mostly state personnel, program people, public information people, things of that nature. After the 2004 and 2005 hurricane seasons, particularly 2004, most of the requests that came through the system were for local resources, not for state personnel. So fire capabilities, communications capabilities, search and rescue, swift water rescue, things of that nature, including assistance that may be needed in the water sector. Below the state level, any resource that's deployed has to be cloaked as an agent of the state. Typically, that means subdivisions of state government would have some type of a legal instrument with the state to cloak them as agents of the state so that their resources could be deployed. This brings up maybe a little twist for the water sector where you have private utilities in some instances. The state would have to find a mechanism to cloak them as agents of the state in order to deploy them. But it's possible, but that's a conversation between the state and the utility. We utilize a web-based request and offer process and tracking system. We call it the EMAC operations system. It's very accountable, and it can track from the beginning, from a request being made to an offer being made and accepted, and then it can be tracked right through the end of the deployment and reimbursement. It's a pretty robust system. EMAC administration. So Jeff touched a little bit about how NEMA administers the compact, but over the years, there has been a defined government structure developed. I'll show you that structure on the next slide. There have been business protocols developed similar to bylaws, but since the compact is not a corporation, bylaws aren't appropriate. So we call them protocols, but it defines who, since it's run by the states, by state personnel, state members, how states govern themselves to make this process work. Administration and oversight is provided by the National Emergency Management Association. For those of you who are not aware of what NEMA is, it's a 501c3 corporation that membership consists of state emergency management directors primarily, and others that have an interest in being a member and being involved in association business. But it is supported by the Council of State Governments administratively. So when we talk about NEMA, it's actually a nonprofit corporation, but NEMA is also the administrative arm provided through the Council of State Governments in Lexington, Kentucky. NEMA provides oversight. The state directors provide oversight through an EMAC standing committee of the organization. The standing committee has assigned responsibility to do the work to state members, staff, in other words, that comprise the EMAC Executive Task Force, which is the governing body. And then, of course, after the 2004 and 5 hurricane seasons, we developed a EMAC advisory group consisting of representatives from, I think, on the order of somewhere 25 or so disciplines, associations that represent disciplines that have a role in disaster response. This is the governance structure. You'll see the National Emergency Management Association with the overall responsibility, their EMAC committee underneath. The EMAC administration provided by the Council of State Governments to the left. The advisory group, which consists of the discipline representatives. And then at the bottom, we have the Executive Task Force, state members who comprise that to do work of the compact. And then when it becomes activated, we have EMAC operational components as well. Here are the goals of EMAC. This comes out of a strategic plan that's reviewed annually. First is to provide national leadership and expertise on mutual aid. Not just interstate mutual aid, but mutual aid across the board. There's been an effort recently, the last few years, to establish cross-border agreements with Canadian provinces, and there is in fact an agreement in place now with all of the provinces in Canada and the border states that still would allow other states to enter into that agreement. We call it the North American Emergency Management Compact. The second goal is to coordinate capabilities with national preparedness goals and response and recovery goals. So we want to make sure that we're in line with FEMA goals and objectives for response and are integrated into that framework that they provide and espouse for our national capability. Thirdly, to sustain and enhance national mutual aid capabilities. We're constantly involved in working with various disciplines to provide exercises, to develop model mission-ready packages, which I'll get into in a minute, and just basically keep a conversation going to constantly improve the mutual aid program in the United States. Finally, promote and market mutual aid and strengthen relationships with stakeholders. We do attend many venues over the course of a year, the National Hurricane Conference, other conferences, and we do participate, as Jeff mentioned, the seminars that have been held by the EPA to promote mutual aid and strengthen those relationships. So this is very important. When can EMAC be used? It does require that the governor of an affected state that has a disaster declare an emergency or disaster under his or her state law. That's what we call the trigger. Without a disaster, assistance cannot be provided or requested under the compact. Here's a quick overview of the EMAC process. For training purposes and organizational purposes, we've divided or developed five phases that we have specific actions that take place during each phase. Let me cover them briefly for you. Pre-event preparation, that's when you do your planning, training, and exercising and improve your capabilities. Activation is once the governor declares, member states will open up an event in the EMAC operations system. That's that web-based system that we use to request, offer, and track resources. The next phase is request and offer. That's the one that most of the activity that people are involved in will recognize. It's when you make a request and do all those things necessary to legally be able to deploy it, to track it, and then to get it back home safely. Response and mobilization is when the actual personnel and equipment is field deployed and returns home. And we've included reimbursement as the fifth phase. That's an area where we've tried to really emphasize reimbursement as a potential not a drawback, but a potential could impact the ability of people to use EMAC in the future. The bottom line is they want to be reimbursed. And when we're deploying local first response assets, it's imperative that states be prepared to reimburse them quickly. Otherwise, they may not be so inclined to utilize the compact in the future. So let's take a look at the request and offer phase. First of all, I'd like to stress that this does not replace what states do as a normal course of business. So I retired from New York State Emergency Management 8 years ago, and the process that was utilized there was that local subdivisions of a county would make their needs known or their impacts known to the county. The county would then make a request to the state for an asset. Once the state received it, we had several options that we could utilize to respond. One would be send a state agency in. Perhaps we had a state stockpile, send some equipment in from our office. We could go to procurement, or we could look at donations, or we could look at mutual aid. So that mutual aid is one method that can be used to provide assets where they're needed. So let's look at the process briefly. So we have an impacted local jurisdiction. They send their request through the state system, however that individual state operates. It reaches the state EOC. This is where the state will determine whether they have it available in state or through an intrastate agreement or some other opportunity to get that resource deployed. They may decide that it's not available. Jeff mentioned earlier that a lot of times in major events, resources are not available within a state. They're exhausted. And that's the purpose of EMAC. So if the impacted state determines the resource would be best obtained through EMAC, they can make a request through the EMAC operations system. That the request would detail the scope of the mission, the resources needed, compiles needed resource specifics if that's appropriate, and then transmits that request to potential assisting states using the EOS. Now that being said, there's other methods that can be used. We recommend first primarily that if you know of a resource that's available from a specific state, pick the phone up and call them, and then utilize the system to memorialize that and go through the legal process to have a signed agreement. This brings up a point with WARN, water utilities. If you know of a utility in another state that has a system that you might want to use in your state, the state should know that, needs to know that. So they can make a specific request to that state if they know of it. So in order for it to be legal, it has to go through the state, has to go through the EOS. A lot of times people not understanding that might send something miscue, and it develops all kinds of issues that have to be attended to if that happens. So the potential assisting state then would review the request, identify their resource providers, whether they have the capability, whether it's available. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you may have equipment that's in repair, or you may have a need that you need to keep that resource for your own use or protection of your citizens. That's a decision made by the assisting state and the resource provider. The resource provider then, that would be in this case the water utility, determines if they have that and they can accomplish that mission. If it is, they let the assisting state know that. And that's when the assisting state makes an offer to the requesting state to consider. Now, the requesting state does not have to accept an offer. That's their prerogative to accept or not. And that's something else that's important to keep in mind. There may be, between the time that a provider in another state offered assistance, perhaps the state requested direct assistance from FEMA, and they've got maybe some assistance from the EPA or a FEMA contract, whatever. So it's not always the case where until that, what we call a request for assistance is signed, it may not be the case that you're always going to deploy. So you need to stay in touch with, the state officials to make sure that you're aware of what point in the process a particular offer is. So the requesting state can accept or decline. They notify the assisting state of their decision, and resources are deployed. And we have special operational component we call the A team, advanced team, that their responsibility is to track and monitor all missions in a particular state and ensure that once the mission is complete, people are home safely and the mission is closed out. So I have a couple more slides here. I'd like to talk briefly about mission ready packages. Years ago, people used to make requests for resources blindly. The offers would come in kind of like a box of chocolates. You never knew what you were going to get. It was effective at the time, but a lot of work has been put into developing and encouraging resource providers and states to develop what we call mission-ready packages. That's taking single resources, let's say water utility personnel, water utility equipment, other types of things associated with the deployment in the water sector, and packaging them in a specific format. We have formats that are used for this to include all the metrics associated. What do you need when you get there? Do you need fuel? Do you need support for this? Do you need lodging? You'll have in advance your personnel salaries, those costs identified, equipment costs pre-identified. The only thing really that we do not know in advance is where we're going. So travel is always a last minute end dates or the last minute addition. But this greatly facilitates providing assistance because now you're not trying to contact people on a Friday afternoon on a holiday weekend to get salary information, to determine equipment, and all those types of metrics associated with your deployment. Mission-ready packages are beneficial for both intrastate use and interstate. I'm aware that WARN promotes having resource inventories prepared. Mission-ready packages, if a water provider or a utility has interest in providing their resources out of state, certainly they can talk to the state and find out how to develop these mission-ready packages. The mission-ready packages also comprise a state resource inventory, which is something that many states are probably pretty well along in having a resource inventory available. Now, here's the last slide. This is the future. We refer to the future as mutual aid support system. It's, again, a web-based inventory of resources. What it basically does is it takes mission-ready packages, allows them to be either uploaded into MAS or developed directly in MAS, which is a database that's directly tied to the EMAC operations system. So let's say a water utility had a mission-ready package developed in MAS. It can be mapped, it can be visually identified. If a state needs X from a utility, if it were mapped, you can see where the closest one was. You can get contact information and call them, and it's directly uploadable into the EOS. So when you make an offer, basically, if you have your MRP done, if it's in MAS, and you simply upload it and add your travel and your costs, your dates, and basically the heavy load that existed 20 years ago in trying to identify metrics for an offer is done. It's been used most recently in last year's events to some extent. And as you can see, excuse me, it can greatly facilitate resource deployment. So with that, that's a brief overview, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jack. What we would like to do now is Carol Hinton, again from the University of Florida TRIO Center, will provide a presentation about their water sector experience with EMAC during Hurricane Irma. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Carol.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Carol Hinton, and I have been the Flaw Ward Administrator since Flaw Ward started in 2005. In Florida, we're very fortunate that our primacy agency, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, funds Flaw Ward. So I'm able to devote a portion of my time to administrating Flaw Ward, which includes going to the Emergency Operations Center during emergencies. We do some training, the database, and the web page. So as I said, we started in 2005, and that year we jumped right into an EMAC without even knowing what we were doing. We sent crews to Mississippi during Hurricane Katrina. And it was very successful. We had to work through some of the issues, but we got there, helped people, submitted for reimbursement, and all of our utilities got paid. So we are housed in the Emergency Operations Center under ESF 10, Emergency Service Function 10, and Emergency Service Function 1 and 3. So since ESF 10 is actually emergency response, we handle all the water and wastewater needs during an emergency. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline, how this all came to be, the decision-making process, why we did an EMAC, the response, the WARN assistance. This was very important and helped smooth things along, having my fellow WARN members to work with, and of course, lessons learned. So, of course, on September 10th, 2017, Hurricane Irma makes landfall at Cudjoe Key. It's in the Florida Keys, and it was a Category 4 storm, 135-mile-an-hour wind speed. So, on September 12th, about 11:43, the request for assistance from the Florida Keys Aqueduct Authority was loaded into actually, it came into EM Constellation, and then I put it into the FlawWARN database. And it came in that they were in extreme need of water system distribution crews to make repairs from Ocean Reef to Key West. That's 117 miles, customers or service lines that needed assistance. So this shows you just a little bit of the damage. I know you've seen a lot of different pictures on TV, but you can see it was hit. It was horrible. Here's a little bit of a map that shows the Florida Keys Aqueduct Authority where they are. You can see their headquarters is up here, which is actually in Florida City, and they run all the way to Key West. If any of you've ever been driving to Keys, you know it's one road in and out, lots of bridges, narrow road, and that's where that's their service area. A little bit of information about the Florida Keys Aqueduct Authority. As I said, they're headquartered, which is kind of different, in Dade County, which for Florida City is, but they serve Monroe County. There's only one road in and out of the Keys, and most of these breaks were in the service lines, not the mains. So they're a lime softening plant, 22 MGD, 130 miles of transmission mains. You can see 3 different sizes there. Pressure's up to 250 PSI, crossing 43 bridges. 4 booster stations along there, and 650 miles of distribution lines. You can see they serve 55,000 people, and they also have an RO plant. They used a little bit during the hurricane. Two RO plants. Here's the status. Here's where we were when the request came in, because we'd already been up there active for about 3 days. There were 40 requests in the queue. See, you may not recognize these utilities, but they represent both large and small systems. Pahokee, very small there by down by Clewiston, by Lake Okeechobee. Collier County, a big county on the southwest part of Florida, they were hit hard. Several requests came in from them. City of Mulberry, very small, very small. So we had requests from large and small utilities during the hurricane. We had, as I said, we were at 40 requests when theirs came in. We ended up with 130 requests for assistance overall. Here's just out the state, a little layout of the state. Here's where the Keys Aqueduct Authority is. As you can see, there's going down the Florida Keys. A lot of bad power outages and flooding right here because it came up through southwest Florida. They were hit hard. So the day 2 after the hurricane hit, we had a conference call with our steering committee, and I'm like, yeah, I know my utilities here in Central Florida, they're probably going to be able to help, but they all had power outages. None of them could help. So that's when I knew I was in trouble, because I knew Northeast Florida had got hit hard. Jacksonville has a lot of flooding, a lot of power outages in the north part. We, of course, our emergency operations center was in Tallahassee, and even some of the Tallahassee, their utilities were hit. So we had power outages there, but at the EOC, of course, we had backup generators. So that just left what I call our heroes, the northwest part of Florida. And these are some large utilities, but a lot of smaller utilities that they were available to help us. Now, and actually over 90% of the utilities in Florida were affected by Irma. So why did I go with an EMAC? Well, I immediately knew that we couldn't handle this. It was a large request, both physical size of what they needed. I mean, they were going to cover a lot of territory. You know, it wasn't a concentrated area, and they needed a lot of help. They needed a lot of help, and it was repair work they were doing. It wasn't just, you know, bringing generators and hopscotching from one lift station to another. And the other thing is, tourism is our #1 industry in Florida, and we depend on tourism a lot. So I knew we had to get the Keys up and running. So the EMAC process. So one of the benefits of being part of the WARN network was I was able to contact one person, Kevin Morley with AWWA, and talk about, you know, let him know I was going to do an EMAC and who should I send it out to. We had already gotten kind of a heads up through the WARN network because for a potential request from Hurricane Harvey, or from Texas for Hurricane Harvey. So we were kind of all on alert. Of course, that didn't mean anything to me when Irma came through. So I talked to Kevin and we decided to send one out to Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. I ended up adding Tennessee because Tennessee had already been, their utility in Nashville had been talking to one of our large utilities in Jacksonville. So I knew they kind of already were thinking about, or the possibility they would be able to come. So on a side note, while I was working on the EMAC, the town of Jupiter, which is not a big town in Florida, but they were able to send 3 crews. They got their electricity up and they felt like they were in good shape. So they sent 3 crews down that were able to get there quicker than our out-of-state crews. And later we reached out to Miami-Dade Water and Sewer, which is right there next to Monroe County and the Keys, and they sent a So as I was working on this, the people at the EOC officials wanted me to send more crews. They wanted to kind of manage how many crews that should come from out of state. But my contact let me know that the number I requested was the number he could handle. So I think that's a lesson. You got to always respect what the utility wants. So September 13th, 9 p.m., I submitted the EMAC request, and the EMAC desk rejected my request. I filled out my Rec A, and they told me I didn't have enough information. They said the potential responding states would be calling me for more information. And of course, I said, I don't care. That's not a problem. I'll be talking to him anyway. It was not a problem. And I did talk to him several times. So, and I also was told I needed to provide an estimate of the cost. And I knew from my EMAC training that the responding state provided the estimate, not the requesting state. And that's not something I could come up with. I mean, I did not have any information on how much it would take to bring 40 different people with equipment and supplies into Florida. So I'm going to show you my request. This is what I got from my contact at the Aqueduct Authority. They needed 10 crews to assist with repairing distribution lines, and each crew should consist of 4 men or women, each with equipment. 3 to 4 backhoe loaders overall, a dump truck, the different size repair clamps, the type, the size polytube, and brass repair clamps. I thought this was about as specific as you could get. And of course, they also included information about where to stage, that they would, of course, be providing lodging and food. So I went home that night, thought about it, not home, to my hotel, thought about it, and I'm like, I'm not doing this over. I know that, you know, I don't need the estimated cost, and I have all the information. So I went in there ready to fight for it. So I resubmitted the same request. I didn't change anything, didn't change a word, But there was a different person at the EMAC desk, and she looked at it and entered it to the system. It was not a problem at all. So I think a lot of times this is where it comes in that we, the water utilities, the water primacy agencies have to work with the EMAC people in your emergency operations center so they understand that we know what we need. When we ask for something, we're going to give as much information. I mean, it was very specific information. The interesting thing, at the EMAC desk, there were EMAC personnel brought in from other states. So I think it was more experience the second day. So the first response came from Tennessee, and they ended up responding with 6 crews, and they were from Metro Water in Nashville. So the estimated cost was over $300,000. When I got that, the EMAC staff person brought me the response, and I said, okay, what do I do now? They told me to sign to accept the proposal, and we were good to go. Well, at my day job at the University of Florida, I don't sign for expenditures for $300,000. So I took it to my ESF chief, and he signed it without giving it a thought because he knew that was that's what you needed to do. And it was just a okay in it because really, it's approved by the head of the DEM. So they entered it into the system, and Tennessee was getting ready to go. They came a long way. They came the farthest with the largest crew. North Carolina, they were actually the first one to arrive. They sent 3 crews, Greenville Water, Mount Pleasant Water Works, and Renewable Water Resources. They got there on a Friday night, and they were ready to get started. They really didn't have as far to travel, so that was good. And it's kind of something to think about. If you can get your surrounding states to help, it just saves time and travel. The kind of the problem with us, with it being in the Florida Keys, is once you cross the Florida line, you still have another 8 hours to get to the Keys, so you're not quite there yet. And then North Carolina sent 1 crew. But this was pretty unique because they were members from 2 utilities, the city of Jacksonville and Onwassa. And what the Warren in North Carolina, they decided to work with these 2 utilities, but they were both really small utilities. These emergency responders comprised 20 their workforce. So what happened was, just in case either of these utilities had an emergency, their neighboring utilities committed to help them with the internal mutual aid. Okay, here's how the Warren helped. And this, as I said before, this was a big help. We have a central contact person that knows what's going on, that keeps in touch with all of us. So we can contact them. So I was able to talk with him and determine which states I wanted to send it to, because you don't want to send it out to all the other 49 states and the other territories, because I wanted to be respectful of the time to prepare a response. And I wanted really to get it to the states that were most likely to respond to us. I had met the other Warren chairs at our national meetings and at our Region 4 EPA training, so I had a relationship built. I was familiar with a lot of how things, so it was beneficial. And then after the hurricane, the EPA, or AWWA, and the EPA sponsored an after-action meeting for us to learn from the EMAC experience. And this will be shared with all the Warrens. So that's good. I learned a lot just going to that meeting. So really, Georgia would have been our go-to state, but they had got hit too, and they were assisting their own members, so they weren't able to respond. I want to talk a little bit about the working conditions. So I was working, I was a little tired. I was working several long days at the EOC, but when I thought I was tired, I remembered that I was in an air-conditioned office. I had plenty of food, more than I needed, and I was sleeping in a good bed at night at the hotel. I wasn't out in the hot, humid weather working in these conditions. So that can show you a little bit about what they were working in. What the Aqueduct Authority did is they divided 3 sections: the upper keys, the middle keys, and the lower keys. And that was the way so they could manage bringing it all on as quickly as possible. The EMAC was actually extended after 2 weeks. After the first 2 weeks, my contact got in touch with me and said he wanted to extend it. And I was like, well, I've got Florida crews that would really love to go down there and help you. But he felt like they were already trained on the way they did things, on the locality. They were there and they were good to go. So we extended it. Now, not all the people stayed, but we did extend the EMAC. One of the interesting things was that some of the crews would take note of the people as they were out fixing the lines. And if it was an elderly person there, and they were first just fixing lines to the meter, so there still were problems from the meter to the house. If there was somebody they didn't think would be able to get their lines fixed, they would go back and help them at night. So I mean, just a salute and heads up to all these people going the extra mile. One thing that did happen is the Aqueduct Authority voted to let the people keep on, and so in the end, the authority did repair all the lines to the house, which is unusual. Okay, we did learn a lot of lessons from this, and I think the first one is that the state primacy agencies can help by making sure that there's an understanding of the process, how it relates to water sector need. I think if you work together with your emergency operations center, the more you can work together and communicate them so that they understand what we need in the water section. Conference call. We held a conference crew with everybody from multiple primary contact, but then later on, I found out that they really needed to connect directly with the person on the ground, because the person I sent them to, Tom, was at the Aqueduct Authority office in Florida City, but they needed to talk to the person they were going to be working with, because he had his staff working with the crews, so they needed to talk to them. It just it would have helped them a little more, know more about what they were getting into. Housing and food. Now, the Aqueduct Authority, they provided food, but North Carolina brought their own camper, and it saved a lot of time. They were able to position it kind of in the middle of their territory. I think they were close to a Winn-Dixie. They would just come and grill at night. They didn't have to worry about going and moving and driving every morning, because sometimes the housing was like 45 minutes away. So that saved them really there. It could be 45 minutes to an hour because there's one road in and out. So the other utilities, that was one of the lessons learned. They said next time they were going to rent a camper. South Carolina kind of did the next best thing. They had hauled a utility trailer. So they went after the first night, put an air conditioner in it, slept on cots. So they preferred staying close, and I think they were actually close to the North Carolina crews. They just felt like the time was better spent being close to where they were working. So one of the problems was one state, their crews did not have enough spending power on their purchasing cards, so people ended up having to use their personal cards to get gas. So your responders may not always be the person with a P card with a high limit. Now, I know sometimes that can be changed, but I think it's just something that wasn't anticipated. I know occasionally fuel stations in Florida, but we have fuel stations set up, but I was told, since this is an EMAC, have them pay and then they'll get reimbursed. But in the future, once they hit the Florida line, it would just be better if they could get fuel at the fuel stations, and they would just show them their Rec A number. So it was another lesson. A lot of utility trucks that are good enough to work within your service area are not in good enough shape to travel 700 or 800 miles. One utility had a couple of trucks break down before they got there. So that's something to think about, how far you're going and how good shape your trucks are in. One of the utilities had an administrative person, and it was actually our largest utility that responded, and that really helped keep the crews organized. They did a lot with the record keeping, because if you have 20 or 30 people, you're keeping all your receipts, people's time, so that worked out real well. A small crew, it may not be necessary, but with a large crew, they said it was very beneficial. I had listed, of course, bring sunscreen, bug spray, but really you're just not used to, everybody wasn't ready for the Florida, what we call no-see-ums and fire ants. So you gotta let people know about the environmental conditions, but sometimes they're still not ready. So everybody has to be prepared to stay in the environment they're going to. And I think we have some extreme conditions here, but they could be running the same thing for our guys to go somewhere in cold weather. They might not be prepared for icy cold weather. So that's all I have now. I appreciate being able to talk today, and I really appreciate Tennessee, North Carolina, and South Carolina being there to help us during Irma.
Great. Thank you very much, Carol. And what I would like to do now is to discuss how you, as the primacy agency, can support the EMAC process. And first and foremost is by learning more about EMAC. And Jack, what I'm going to do is ask you about what are some of the ways that they can do that through maybe emacweb.org or take e-learning courses.
Okay. The EMAC website has a wealth of information. That's the address there, www.emacweb.org. There's materials that can be printed out, handed out at meetings. They can be distributed, however, electronically. Plus, we have a major effort to develop basic and even more advanced courses on EMAC that people can take independently by registering on the website. I guess, Jeff, that I would encourage the use of the website. If you haven't visited, I encourage you to visit, let people know that it's there, particularly the WARN groups. I think a lot of them do know, but there's always new information being provided for people there.
Yes, and that's good. The NEMA EMAC website is really good. There's a wealth of information there. So if you really do want to learn more about EMAC, you can go to that address there, and you'll be able to pull up presentations and all sorts of great information. So, and then second, what you can do to support the EMAC process is to encourage utilities to further explore and understand it. Maybe through sanitary surveys, capacity development, operator certification. And we have developed, EPA has developed an EMAC fact sheet. It's just a simple 2-page fact sheet. It contains the EMAC.web website that can be used to get the ball rolling. And again, the web link is provided there. Then it is very important to meet with local, county, and state emergency management agencies, and first and foremost, to develop those relationships, a meet and greet, because really that leads to then you discussing EMAC, and in particular the water sector, water and wastewater utilities, and kind of get them up to speed on that as well. And then also learning your state system for processing EMAC assistance. Through local, through county, through state EMAs, and then developing EMAC procedures specifically for the water sector. And as part of WARN, maybe adjusting your WARN operational plans to also include interstate mutual aid and assistance information. And then next, you can participate and invite local, county, and state emergency management agency personnel to water sector trainings, exercises, and conferences, and vice versa. Once you meet and greet and you know your EMAC reps through the emergency management agency, have them invite you to their exercises as well. And these relationships were formed at our workshops, where we again brought together utilities and emergency management agency personnel. So they were able to meet, get each other's information, address, so they could further have those discussions after the workshop. And then finally, by representing utilities during emergencies at the State Emergency Operations Center. And some primacy agencies have a seat at the State Emergency Operations Center where they can help facilitate resource requests from utilities through the EMAC process. So those are really the main ways that you as a primacy agency can support the EMAC process. So with that, this last slide contains all of our contact information. and these presentations will be provided after this workshop or after the webinar today. So just like to thank everyone for attending. And with that, I'd like to jump into the question and answer period. And so I'll turn it over to Bridget to facilitate that.
All right, thanks, Jeff. We've got quite a few questions here, and there's something for everyone. So, Jeff, while I have you front and center on the phone, going back to your opening remarks, can you talk about when you think there might be a training going on in Region 9? You had talked earlier about the different trainings that you've given in Regions 3 and 4 and 5. Are you gonna, I know you've talked about doing 7, but will you have a Region 9 training anytime soon?
So as of right now, we're just focusing on Region 7, and then in the next fiscal year, we'll decide if we're going to hold another one in another region. At this point in time, we may shift the focus of a workshop to more of a training. So we do plan to continue these trainings into the future, Bridget. But right now, we haven't decided where the next training will take place. And even if it'll be online training or webinars, just to what we've learned from all of these workshops, lessons learned, action items that we can take and use to help educate all utilities across the country, the ones that weren't able to attend the workshops as well. So to answer your question, we do not have one planned after Region 7 right now, although, well, we don't have another region planned, but we do plan to conduct workshops and trainings into the future.
All right, thank you. Jack, I have a question for you. Can you talk a little bit about examples that states might be able to see or share on how to get the resources, the utilities and states connected as agents of the state? Is that something that states can do ahead of time? Is there a formal process? How does that work?
Okay, so to become an agent of the state, there needs to be, as I mentioned, some type of legal instrument. Most states use an MOU. I'm aware that many of them have standing MOUs with large cities and with counties or parishes in Louisiana. A utility, if they're affiliated with the county, they could be covered by the county agreement or parish agreement, or they could simply enter into a separate one. But that's something that has to be discussed directly with the State Emergency Management Agency and the utility. Warren may have some interest, the Warren chair in each state may have an interest working with the primacy agency to set a meeting up with the emergency management folks and discuss how they could implement it with those utilities that may be interested in sharing across state lines through EMAC, and establish a process to do that.
Right, so it sounds like the quick answer would be that if the primacy agency wants to encourage or facilitate that kind of exchange, they need to speak with potentially interested utilities. Then the two go together to the emergency management agency and talk about how to become an agent of the state.
Basically, it's a state decision to make. I can't speak for any individual state or states, but you know, I would say probably while it's being discussed among utilities, most importantly would be to have someone representing Warren, all the utilities in a state, and the primacy agency to meet with the emergency office and have that discussion.
Okay, and one more, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Out west, we have a couple of states who have their own mutual aid agreements or their own arrangements on supporting each other across state lines. So then the question becomes, does a state need to go through the EMAC process for resources if they already have their own separate agreement outside the EMAC?
So the answer to that would be no. It doesn't supplant or supersede any other agreements in place. As I mentioned when I started my presentation, EMAC is another tool that can be used. As a matter of fact, you could have those existing agreements utilized and still use EMAC alongside if that's something that, you know, can bring resources that aren't otherwise available. So yeah, they can continue to use what they have, and they have the option to use EMAC as well.
All right, thanks. And Carol, a question for you. Are you aware, is there a standard time duration for EMAC response agreements? In other words, when you sent your request up and the responding utilities said, yes, we will come down and we'll help in these different areas, does that agreement come with we will help for 2 weeks, or is there a rule of thumb cutoff after which you have to renegotiate an extension?
Well, we set it up for 2 weeks, and Jack might know more about this, but I believe that is the standard. That's what we asked for. And then when the 2 weeks were up, getting close to be over, we well, they didn't really sorry, they just extended it.
Okay.
Yeah, so Carol,
Hard
I can add to that, Bridget. Basically, as a standard, we say that a typical deployment is 2 weeks plus travel on either end. In a lot of situations, I'll use law enforcement as an example, where the requirement may be for a month or more. A lot of times, they will work out a rotation schedule, or use an alternate time period to the 2 week norm to make sure you can sustain it. And basically, the example that Carol had, where they noted that they had the experience now working in Florida for that. I forget the reference to the group that oversaw the water utility there, but it's a lot of times it makes sense to have the same people extended or rotate others in with them that they're familiar with. In law enforcement, they may have the same command structure, but rotate different personnel through, but keep the same system, because as Carol pointed out, it was advantageous to have people and not have to train them up again. So 2 weeks is a norm, but it's not an absolute requirement.
Is there an opportunity then, do you think, to extend the EMAC response even into the recovery phase after an incident?
Sure. Well, the EMAC does not really depend upon any requirements that the federal government may have or any other timelines that are established. It's whatever one governor wants for his or her jurisdictions to recover that another governor is willing to provide. The time period is not limited. The only limitation would be the needs of the resource provider to take care of their own situations back home. But basically, as long as the assistance is needed, it's whatever the two states agree to through their resource providers' needs.
And to add to that, our utilities, when they went to Mississippi, after a point, it was a little more than 2 weeks, they felt like they were into recovery and that their utility needed them back. So they left after they did the first, say, emergency response.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There is no mandate that a member state has to respond to a request. Of course, states want to help one another. That's been demonstrated. Last year, tens of thousands of people deployed, including National Guard. But, the law says if you need the resource for the protection or for the to service the people of your own state, you're not obligated to respond. So again, and if you need to recall, if people are deployed and you need them back, you have command and control of them. You can take them back at any time. Obviously, you would want to talk to the impacted state, about it, do you need replacements? You give them a little heads up. But yeah, there's no mandate that they have to fill the full mission dates.
Okay. Well, then thinking about how to make this all look good from a national level, you all talked about the mission ready packages. Is there a gold standard for that, or is there an outline that most states or most users, most utilities have adopted in terms of formatting to talk about what is available? Is there
There is, as a matter of fact, Bridget, we have on the EMAC webpage, across the top, the ribbon on the top, there's a resources tab. And if you click on it, and it's a drop down, and I believe there's I'm not looking at it, so I'm kind of guessing now. There's a link there to mission ready packages, how to develop one. There's guidance. There's a pre-recorded webinar that can be viewed and how to put one together. And there are templates. It's a spreadsheet template. It goes from, I think, 0 to 25 personnel, 25 to 50, up to, I think, 1,000. But I don't think anyone's filled one of those out. But the point is, it's there. And that's why I say, if you visit the webpage, there's a wealth of information. Basically, it's there to support the state members in carrying out their responsibilities. The MRP is a tool to help them to encourage people that are willing to deploy through EMAC to get the metrics and things associated with that done in what we call phase 1 preparedness, pre-preparation, so that when an event occurs, it's a simple matter to upload that into the request and offer system. So the beauty of MASS is it eliminates the need to do a spreadsheet. It's a database, so you're directly entering your data into the database, and it's directly uploadable into an offer. So, it's, if you do the work in advance, it's basically flawless when you need to deploy. So,
very cool. All right. We're getting down towards the end of our questions here, but let me ask, when using the WARN system as an example, when those WARN agreements are signed and activated, the giving and receiving WARN members come to an agreement about costs and liabilities and worker compensation and meeting state-specific requirements. Do those same types of discussions happen with EMAC?
Okay, so the answer is yes. So the law, the reason EMAC was developed was because it actually, the impetus for it was Governor Childs of Florida after Hurricane Andrew, when he was frustrated that states that wanted to provide him help were there was impediments to doing so, because the attorney said, what if somebody hurts someone or gets hurt? Are we going to be reimbursed? Are licenses and certifications recognized, and so on. So basically EMAC was developed to ensure that the impediments were removed. So the system has been built around to facilitate and to eliminate anything that could preclude someone that wants to help to go and help. Did that answer your question, or?
I think it did.
I'll add a little bit to that. Within our WARN, and I think all the other WARNs, we have a mutual aid agreement that kind of that determines kind of the same things as the EMAC. And I try to tell them it's not the same, but it's very similar. So if our members sign the mutual aid agreement ahead of time, they've already agreed to things like reimbursement. We use FEMA rates, supervisory, whose control you're under when you get there. Those types of issues are just determined ahead of time. So even within the state, we can provide assistance easier and quicker.
Yeah. So again, we're promoting EMAC, promoting an integrated mutual aid system nationwide. So one of the strengths of a state having a strong interstate system, as Florida does, and many other states do, is that you're organized already. Many of your disciplines, such as the WARN, as Carol mentioned here, other disciplines, public works, public health, all organize themselves for intrastate mutual aid. And it's a simple matter then to step up and deploy through EMAC on an interstate mission, as long as you have that legal instrument cloaking them as agents of the state. But compact covers tort liability, covers reimbursement. We have specific processes that are followed with I hate to say forms, but formats and processes to follow to support the member states with resource providers to make sure that they're aware of their responsibilities, they have access to the proper forms that need to be filed, and basically understand what the process is before they get deployed. That eliminates problems of reimbursement and so on.
All right. I think that pretty much covers most of our questions. I do have one final question for each of you, and that is, you've got more than 20 state drinking water programs on the phone, listening and watching. If you had one thought that you would like to leave these primacy agency staff with, what might that be?
I'll go ahead and start. This is Jeff Fensel. As I showed in my previous slides, spread the word. Let utilities know the best you can through your sanitary surveys and even the fact sheet that there is a mechanism, there is interstate mutual aid and assistance as well out there, as well as intrastate. And it's also important to spread the word of the WARNs as well for other utilities to join the WARNs, the intrastate. Even the smaller utilities who maybe sometimes feel that, well, if I join the WARNs, I don't have a lot to offer. But it's not necessarily about what the small utilities have to offer, it's about what can be offered to them if they're part of the WARNs. So not only spread the word about interstate mutual aid and assistance, but again, even intrastate, and spread the word about the WARNs and the benefits of joining a WARN, not just for giving, but also for receiving.
All right.
Okay, so from my perspective, I would say that knowledge of how EMAC works is important. I think development of procedures, particularly for the WARN networks, the utilities in each state. But for the primacy agency, I think the most important thing would be to meet with the state emergency office and, try to come to some, I don't think the states or emergency management offices are as aware of utility needs or resources that are available. I can tell you in the immediate days of response, the first few days or the week, it's probably not high on their agenda for what needs to be done, but educating them to the need and what's available. It's easy to solve a problem when you already have a network across the country that, states, water utilities are willing to help other utilities in other states, but they need to get on the radar. So I think a meeting would be my suggestion as a number one priority.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Hey, well, I think
Carol?
they've stole my thunder, but I agree. Work with your emergency operations people. So, because I think all sectors are unique, but really nobody else could have done what we needed in Aqueduct Authority but another utility, and we couldn't do it within the state. And so educate, and of course, make sure you're in contact with your WARN, not just about EMACs, but your WARN people. We've been very lucky in Florida that we've worked closely from the beginning with our emergency management. We went up there and toured the EOC as we were setting it up, and we've, of course, we were funded and worked closely with the primacy agency. But get everybody together and work together. And I also think that these tools that that we have, the web EOC or web EMAC, emacweb.org, spread the word about that and train everybody. Because I think even in Florida, not a lot of our utilities really understand an EMAC, but they're happy when we can provide help.
All right. Well, thank you. I liked all three of those answers, and I think I would like to add my voice to yours to recommend to the states on the phone that if you reach out to your emergency management agency counterparts and educate them on the value of water, and let them educate you on the EMAC process and how to be appropriately positioned when the emergency happens. And then both of you state agencies go together and try to strengthen the education and understanding of the water utility community, because they're the ones who are going to be on the ground and in the line of fire. And all we can do is provide the best possible support we have available. So if we can make sure that we all collectively understand what that support entails. I think we will have faster response times and shorter response periods and a return to normal operations in a more efficient manner, or at least that's my hope for the day. So with that, seeing no additional questions, I will ask if anyone has any final thoughts to share with the group, and if not, we can conclude the webinar. So any final thoughts? Jeff, you normally have something to say.
No, I just want to thank Jack and Carol for providing the presentations today, and as well as you, Bridget, and the ASWA for inviting us to speak today. Anytime we have a chance to get some information out there, very important information like interstate mutual aid assistance or any of the topics, we really appreciate it. So with that, again, thanks again to all, and those are my final thoughts, Bridget.
Great, okay. And with that, I will remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, and we will be posting the event on the ASWA website at www.aswa.org within the next few days. So check in and see what you can do to share this information with others, and hopefully we were able to answer your questions. And I appreciate all of your time and attention. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.